Okay, so if you guys don't know me, just a little bit of backstory. So I was the leader of this group for a couple months back in, I guess, middle of last year. Recently I got hired on at a company called Trivago in Düsseldorf, Germany. And I was asked to come back and sort of talk about sort of my experience, what I sort of went through to get there, and sort of some tips, tricks, things to look out for when you're trying to, as I say, how to get away with JavaScript. So a little bit more of my history. So I wanted to talk about what I actually did to actually land myself in Düsseldorf, Germany. So summer 2016, I was finishing my degree in German. I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. If anybody knows what you can do with a German degree, please raise your hand and tell me, because there's not much. So I decided to start looking at Code Academy. I actually went through Code Academy first, did a bunch of that stuff, and then went through, started working on Free Code Camp. And then I've been with Free Code Camp ever since. So winter of 2016, I got back home from Germany. So I actually did a study abroad. Got back and was like, okay, so I need to actually take this a little more seriously. Did a bunch of stuff on Free Code Camp, did a bunch of stuff on Code Academy, all of that good stuff, everything online. But I sort of had this feeling of, ooh, I need something different. I need something a little more hands-on, something more of like a classroom vibe. So I started looking for basically boot camps. Didn't feel kind of comfortable spending $20,000 on a boot camp. So I went through OK Coders, which I'll talk about here in a moment. But I found OK Coders, I found Free Code Camp, I found this group, started coming to this one, went back when it was led by Daniel Ashcraft. And then I also got in touch with Techlahoma and all of the awesome meetups that they put on. So that's spring 2017 is about when I sort of hit the ground running with all of this. So I'd been learning for that 6 months from the summer to the end of winter. I took 2 OK Coders courses, and during the second OK Coders course, I went and finally got my first job at WeGoLook. At the same time, I started to attend Free Code Camp OKC, which you guys are doing now, and started talking to the people that would potentially become my employers. So I got my first job at WeGoLook by basically talking to one of the guys in Slack. I was working on I think it was some authentication thing in JavaScript, trying to figure everything out, trying to figure out what exactly I needed to do, where to store things, just double checking to make sure what I was learning was actually what people do in the real world. If what you see in tutorials is what you find in the wild, and for the most part it is. But I did all that. I talked to a bunch of people on Techlahoma, and then got in touch with the guy from WeGoLook, and kind of the rest is history. Applied there probably a month or two later, and he remembered me from actually asking questions. So I sort of used that as a way to gauge where I was actually at in my abilities and learning. So summer of 2017, I was still at WeGoLook. I was getting a little more involved with Free Code Camp. I started giving a couple talks, or I gave a couple talks, not started giving them. And I think I gave a couple talks for other Techlahoma meetups, just to sort of get my face out there, just to get sort of more comfortable with public speaking. And then started mentoring at OK Coders. So they asked me at the end of the second one if I wanted to come, or I guess it wasn't the end of the second one, but later on in the summer they asked me, do you want to come and mentor for them? So this is one of those things that, and I've actually carried this on to this day, is that mentoring, even if you don't know what you're doing, is one of the best ways to actually learn. So if you guys are in that sort of still learning phase, once you start learning something and you see somebody that doesn't quite understand what you just figured out, help them out. It's the fastest way to learn something. It's the fastest way to concrete what you actually know. Yeah. So spring 2018 rolls around. So I guess I had Yeah, so I was at WeGoLook for about 10 months. Ended up at a company called Phlogistics. Did a lot of work with React. Did an entire application using React. And this is where one of the things that sort of I stick with today sort of hit home. Is sort of that idea of being incredibly comfortable with being incredibly uncomfortable. So I'm not gonna lie, nothing that you guys are doing, nothing that you guys are learning is easy. I'm sorry, it's just not. But it's one of those things that you have to stick with it. You have to be okay with feeling weird about what you're doing and feeling sort of like, ooh, I don't know what I'm doing. Should I even be doing this? So I had the same sort of experience back in college. I actually took a Java class my freshman year of college. Not a clue. I think I got a C in that class and I didn't do very well. I don't remember anything from it. But I hadn't gotten into this mindset of actually being comfortable with being really uncomfortable with what I'm working on. So the reason I say that is because at Phlogistics we needed some way to build an application that worked offline, but it wasn't using traditional, it couldn't use traditional software. Had to use the web. We really didn't have any way around it. And so I had to get very comfortable with stuff that didn't have Stack Overflow posts, that didn't have tutorials everywhere. I had some minor stuff on Google that I could look for. That was about it. So I had to sort of figure it out on my own. And I was incredibly uncomfortable with that. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I'm doing this right. And eventually got there in the end. So at the same time as I was working at Phlogistics, I was also still mentoring for OK Coders. Still was present and was there for people to ask questions of, talk on Slack, and all of that good stuff. And I was still giving some talks at Free Code Camp. So the second half of 2018 is when kind of everything came to a head for me. So I was still at Phlogistics. I taught a couple courses at OK Coders, an introduction to HTML and CSS, and then I also taught the introduction to React. And then I also became the leader for Free Code Camp. So I'm not saying everybody needs to become the leader for Free Code Camp, because there's one. But if you want to, talk to Kimberly, because I know she's incredibly overworked. But no, it's one of those things that it gets you in front of people. It gets you some ideas of how to manage things, how to manage your time, and also just how to sort of interact with people on a regular basis. It's a huge part of basically any of our jobs, especially if you decide to go into software development. Because there's always going to be people that don't know as much as you. There's always going to be people that know way more than you, and there's also going to be those people that have no idea what's going on whatsoever. So you have to be able to start to explain those things and start to, I don't want to say dumb down your speech, because that doesn't sound right. I don't like the way that sounds, but it's very much the same thing. It's taking all this tech knowledge that you've got and putting it into bite-sized, easily digestible chunks for people that don't necessarily know what you're talking about. My bosses don't need to know that I use React at work, or they don't need to know I'm using this particular library. They just need to know I'm doing my job. So why does that mean, why should you become a leader for something like this? So that's sort of why. So you have to be able to start to, so a lot of people in here may or may not have a lot of experience, and you have to be able to explain what you're working on and explain what they need to be doing at a very lower level than what you might normally do. And now we are basically here. So winter of 2018 is when everything sort of changed for me. So back in the very beginning, I had sort of said to myself, my goal is I want to become a developer, and I want to get to Germany. Those were the two things. And I had no idea how I was going to do that. So I told myself I'm going to look for some companies online that speak English in Germany and that they actually do what I do. So Trivago was the very first one that came up. So the company language is English. They use a lot of the technologies I use. So I'm a front-end developer, front-end-ish developer. And so I sort of set my goals. So everything that I've been doing since 2016 has been leading me up to that point. So I applied to Trivago back in December. Got an interview in February. Or I got a phone interview at the end of January. Went and did my in-person interview. So I got paid to go to Germany to go to an interview. And then had the job the next day after that interview. And a lot of the feedback that I got, some of the best feedback that I got from that entire process was that they loved how calm I was in front of a crowd, public speaking, live coding, as well as they really, really liked that mentorship experience, all of the teaching other people what I do. And that is going to be for anything, honestly. If you get through free Code Camp and you realize, ooh, this isn't really for me, you might give a couple talks anyway. You might give a couple talks about something that you've learned just to get comfortable speaking in front of people. Because that was the one thing that my direct manager right now has always said is like, I really like that you, I like the way that you took the initiative to learn how to teach people what you do. And that's actually translated into my job. So today, 4 months into this new job, I'm now mentoring, I'm onboarding new people. I'm helping people get acquainted with the company, helping them get acquainted with what we do on a day-to-day basis, getting acquainted with our massive code base. It's funny, it's a single page and it's massive. Yeah, so I moved to Germany back in March of this year, and I've been there ever since. And I just happened to be in town, so I figured I'd give you guys a talk. So I'll leave you guys with this before I actually take questions, and I want questions, please. Or I've got some questions that I can sort of talk about a little bit, but let's see what you guys have. So this is sort of that get comfortable being uncomfortable. And I tried to attribute this to somebody, but there's way too many people that have actually said it. And then I tried looking for a developer that actually said it, and I couldn't find one. But this is sort of this is my motto for my journey and where I'm going and what I want to do. I always want to sort of make myself uncomfortable. And I don't know what I'm doing, but we're going to figure it out. And we're going to find people that know what we're doing, or know what they're doing, and know what I should be doing. So yeah. So do I have any questions before I? Anybody? No? It's always awkward. So I guess the big question that I always get is, yeah.
So what is Trivago? Are they the travel?
Yeah, so he asked, what is Trivago? So let me open up Chrome real quick and show you guys. I'm not on the internet. Wonderful. So what Trivago is we're actually we specialize in finding hotels and connecting you guys with, where am I at? Connecting our users with the best price that they can possibly get for a hotel. Ooh, why am I not connected? Did the password change? Portal thing. There we are. Sorry, that's still in German. Why is it still in German? Anyway, I built that. I didn't build that. Anyways, this is Trivago. So if you guys don't know, it's a website for searching hotels. We've got one of the biggest databases of actual individual accommodations. And typically you can find some of the best prices on our website. In fact, you can find the best prices on our website. Shameless plug. Yeah, so for most of my job, what I do is I work on this page right here. And doing all of the, basically a lot of the hooking up of things in the JavaScript. So that's another thing that would be really, really cool I think would be really cool to talk about is that, so as front-end developers, a lot of times we focus on way too much all at once. So we focus on HTML, we focus on CSS, and we focus on JavaScript. When I took this job, I only focused on JavaScript. That's the only thing I focus on. We've actually got people that actually handle the HTML, making sure it's accessible. They handle the CSS. That's not going to be the case everywhere, so be aware. So in a lot of smaller companies here in Oklahoma, you're going to have a lot of wearing multiple hats. But as soon as you get into some of the larger companies, there's a good chance that you won't need to work on some of that. Keep it in the back of your mind that you definitely need to know it, because sometimes you do. But yeah, so I only work on JavaScript nowadays. Yeah.
So most of the jobs I've had in my career have been through my network,
Mm-hmm.
leveraging that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really unique that you simply applied, especially given that kind of the company was internationally based.
Ooh.
Can you tell me any tips that you use to kind of break through that without having a network?
Yeah. So the question was, how do I? So I've got a really unique story about how I didn't really have a network in Germany with breaking through to this massive multinational company. So it was a little bit unique. So a lot of it has to do with your resume. That's first and foremost. So I get a lot of feedback about my resume, about how it was laid out. So when it was put in front of my, basically when it was put in front of my managers, on my manager's desk, it was, the very first thing was, these are the skills I know, this is what I'm currently doing. Actually, I think I've got a copy of it somewhere that I can send out later. Basically making sure that your resume is sort of up to snuff and that it actually looks like something that they might want to take. So I was actually in kind of in a good place at that point, because I had, they were at that point looking for more junior people. I've been in the game for 2 years. I wouldn't consider myself junior, but I mean, I still am. That's another tip. Never put junior on anything you write. Never put junior on anything you write, because it automatically takes you out of the pool for most jobs. Yeah. Yeah, so I wouldn't, especially your resume. So when they look through your resume, so we just asked, so should we also put junior on your resume? Don't put junior on your resume. The only thing it really is the title at this point. Once you're in a company and they give you the junior title, it's fine, but don't put it on your resume. What that is telling to future employers and to recruiters, if you guys are working through them, is that you can potentially be in for lower pay, that they're going to have to teach you a lot. So there's going to be, every single job is ever, no matter what it is going to have a learning curve. It doesn't matter if it's development or teaching or who knows what. There's always going to be a learning curve. So that should just be baked into the company. And if they don't expect that, I won't comment. But just don't put junior on your resume, because it doesn't help anything. Don't put it on LinkedIn. Please, for the love of God, don't put it on LinkedIn. Don't put it on LinkedIn. Yeah, any other questions? I guess going back to the networking thing, so what was I doing with, so how did I get through it? So the interview process actually was a little bit different than what I normally would have, so what you might have here. So this might be with some other larger companies as well, but their application was entirely online. The one unique thing about it was during the application process, they had me write basically blurbs about myself. So talking about, basically, has anybody heard of like the 30-second elevator speech? Yeah, so that was basically what I wrote down. So they asked me about that. Why did I want to work at Trivago? Why did I want to, why am I applying for the job that I've got? And then they also wanted a little bit of history about me. And then after that process of actually putting in your resume, putting in the time to do that, they actually had me go through this talent community, which is really actually kind of cool. So it actually, even if they don't have a job open for you right now, they will keep you in a pool of people that you could potentially pull on if they need more talents. I guess we call them talents. And so I had to make a couple videos for that. Don't freak out, it's like 90 seconds for each video. There was 4 of them, 5 of them, and just talking about a lot of your ideal working environment, talking about some of your motivations. So part of that is to screen people out as to what is actually your motivation for actually coming. Is it a 9-to-5 job, or is it a career that you're looking for? So after that, I got an email from their talent, I think one of their talent recruiters, and then had a phone interview really late at night. Was it late at night? I think it was probably, I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was not, it was really early in the morning actually, because they're 7 hours ahead of us right now. But I had that with a couple of developers. So that's one of those really cool things that I actually got to talk to developers instead of talking to HR. So oftentimes around here, you're gonna get HR first. They're gonna sort of see if you're like a culture fit, and then they'll hand you off to the developers to sort of figure it out from there. So my very first interview was with actual developers. So they knew the language I was talking, they knew what I was, where I should be in my development path, basically. I did have one of those infamous code questions. So one thing that you might suggest to any future employers, that if you go into an interview and they hand you a whiteboard and tell you, okay, or hand you a dry erase marker and start saying, do something on the board, is say, no. Is there any possible way we can just open up a REPL? So a REPL, if you guys don't know, is like that read event print loop that JavaScript has, that basically, and if you ever use Node, you can open up one of those just in your console. Basically as a way to say, this is me actually coding rather than writing stuff on the board. But they had me go ahead and they had one ready for me. They had a couple questions for me to do. And then during my in-person interview, it was very similar. I was with, I had an HR one just to sort of check culture fit. Luckily, the people that are from HR, we don't actually have an HR department, were a couple of my managers and people from other departments just to see that I fit. And they're all developers, except for a single lonely HR person, which is unfortunate. And then the very next thing was an actual code interview, sort of talking about what I was doing. So one of the things I haven't mentioned is during this whole process, during this whole 2 years of work, I also contributed quite a bit to open source. I say quite a bit. Contributed to open source, specifically an open source project that my company actually works on. Opened a PR, talked to them about it, what was going on, why I needed what I was suggesting for them to use. And then it came up in my interview. So that's another thing. Contribute to open source and then apply to their company, because it might come up. They specifically asked me questions about why I had chosen what I had chosen for them. What were some of the reasons why? I just said that. Some of the reasons why I chose what I chose. What I sort of saw people using that particular feature for, as well as more general questions about their framework as I had gone through it. So yeah, and then had yet again another one of those coding sessions, basically live coding. And it was actually really interesting. So I did the live coding, and then as I'm going through, they started asking questions, and they started asking, so why did you do this? Why did you do this? Just to sort of gauge where all of the knowledge I had came from and why I was doing what I was doing. And I would give basic answers and say, hey, well, this is for performance reasons. And they say, well, do you really need that performance in most applications? And I'd be like, well, no, not really. And then I'd refactor it on the spot. So they gave me that chance to go back and correct my mistake. Not really a mistake, but it's more of basically give them sort of an idea about what's going on in my head as I'm working through these problems. And so if you get into an interview and you're actually handed something that you actually start working on, do that. So refactor as you type. You start talking out loud about what you're doing. Because being able to explain what you're doing is the easiest way to get in with most companies, if they're good. Any other questions? So I think one of the frequently asked questions I get is, why Germany? So back in college, so I got my degree in German language. And as I was learning about it, I had to learn about the culture, and I had to learn about their working culture specifically. And one of the big things is that you get 20 days. You get 20 days of vacation from the government. So if you guys want to do that. But no, it's really a lot cheaper. The life is a lot cheaper there. Food's cheaper. My girlfriend, my lovely girlfriend back here, always sort of laughs at me when we go to the grocery store and I say, oh, we bought that for 40 euros when it would have cost, I guess that's like, what, $45 here. Week's worth of grocery for $45. And that's unheard of here. Free healthcare. I'm just going to leave that out there. But no, it's one of those things that I've just wanted to do since once I started learning the language and started learning about the culture. Specifically about the job culture, my company is a little bit not traditional, let's say. So it's very much startup-y. I say startup-y, but it's not really a startup. It's more of a startup that grew massively, and then they decided to keep the culture. So we've got very flexible working hours. We have these 6 pillars that we talk about, or not pillars. We have these 6 principles that we sort of talk about on a regular basis of things that sort of drive the company forward. And drive our own personal growth forward. And that's not really something that's normal in Germany, I would say. It's more just my company specific. But one of the things that I really love about this place is sort of that I get the chance to learn things. And I don't get penalized if something that we're working on doesn't work. So that's always something good to look for in potentially interviews. So I actually got asked in my interview, so what was one of my biggest failures and how did I cope with it? I didn't have a very good answer because every time you fail here, you can get in trouble for it. But that's something to turn around on the interviewers themselves. So what is something that you guys have failed at and how did you guys bounce back from it? That could be anything relating to things that you guys are trying to build or that company's trying to build, things that they're trying to, like marketing strategies, anything. Just ask, what have you guys failed on and how do you guys handle it? Because if they don't handle failure well, I mean, if it's the only job you can get, you take it, but but it always signals to an interviewer that you're thinking about these kinds of things. So you're thinking about, so 5 years down the line, if what I've been working on doesn't work, where do we go from there? It means that you're actually thinking about those ideas. Anyway.
Can you real quick talk about the pros and cons of a boot camp like OK Coders versus Free Code Camp?
Okay, so I was asked to talk about the pros and cons between boot camps like Free Code Camp and OK Coders. So OK Coders, I wouldn't actually consider it a full-on boot camp. So it's actually more of they're night classes or weekend classes. So when I was taking it, it was, 4 hours, 5 hours on a Saturday morning. 4 hours on a Saturday morning for a month. And then we've got Free Code Camp, which is, I guess, an hour a day or an hour a week on Sundays. But then a lot of additional work outside of class. So the big thing that I sort of take away from both of those, and the reason why I did both of them, so Free Code Camp gave me sort of the stuff to work on between classes. So you come here, you learn something, you hear talk about interviewing, or you hear talk about everything else, and then you go and either apply it or you start working on additional learning. So right now, if you are still trying to get into the field, trying to basically figure this whole thing out, learning is probably, if you have nothing else to do, go learn something. And Free Code Camp gives me that. It also gives me a way to talk to people that are in the same boat. So if you come to the meetups, you people on stream. It gives you a way to talk to other people that are in the same boat as you and might be running into the same problems as you in the course. And you get to talk about them, and you start to get to figure out ways to get around it. And you also learn how to talk to other developers and talk through other things and learn how to pair code and learn how to basically help other people with their problems. On the flip side, something like OK Coders, the reason why I actually would suggest doing something like that is because it's more structured. So you've got an actual instructor. So it's not a different person every week, but there's an actual instructor, and they've got a goal. So the goal is always, I'm going to teach you HTML and CSS, and by the end of this, we are going to have X done. Or in my case, it was, I am going to teach you guys how to learn React, so that you are prepared for the more advanced stuff that we are going to talk about in the next course. And you sort of stick on that one path for a long time. And you get more in depth. So oftentimes 1 hour is nowhere near enough to actually get in depth with the subject, especially if that one person is just talking about that one thing. You need a couple weeks to get, if you're teaching it, you need a couple weeks to get more in depth about what's going on. Now, to sort of riff off that a little bit, there are also the full-time boot camps. So I haven't gone through any of them, so take whatever I say with a grain of salt. But a lot of them are 6-month investments. You've got to put in $20,000. Some of them you have to put in $5,000 up front. And it's a huge time investment. It's a huge additional thing on top of everything else you're trying to do. And oftentimes it's 24/7. You can't, or I guess it's like a normal 8 to 5 job, and you can't take another job outside of it. So if you're going to go down that route, it takes a lot of sacrifice and it takes a lot of extra time and effort. One that I might suggest, if you've got the additional money to spend on it, is actually a university that is out of Berlin, Germany, called Code University. Something very similar to most other basically most other schools, but it's a true university. It takes 3 years to do. You can take as long as you need to do it, and you walk out with a degree in software engineering. And it is a private university, so you don't get the nice little free university from normal German universities. But most of their plans actually handle, you go, You spend the 3 years there, you get your degree, and as soon as you start making X amount of dollars, they have you pay it back. And it's like 21,000 euros or something. So that's another option. But like I said, all of those full-time university, all those full-time boot camps are a humongous time investment. So stick with free Code Camp because it's free. It's in the name. And maybe OK Coders if you want to. So what other questions do you guys have? So who wants to hear what I do during the day? So most of my job, I don't actually work with React anymore. Surprise, surprise. So for the people that I haven't seen before, so back when I was still working with logistics and I was working here, most of my day-to-day life was working with React. I don't use it at all anymore, ever. Most of that is because we've got our own framework that we work with at work. It was homegrown. It was built on top of a library called RxJS. You need to learn that, by the way. It's the future. Just like React is the future. But something that I sort of is sort of going back to this getting comfortable with being incredibly uncomfortable about things, is that I had to learn that framework. I had to go into work. I had to actually take the time to actually learn what they were doing. And I was incredibly uncomfortable. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't understand this. I don't know why I'm doing this. But it's something that this sort of transcends all languages. It transcends all frameworks that you might use. So learn a framework, learn that framework well, but then don't get bogged down in it. So learn what that frameworks are actually doing. So learn actually what you are trying to accomplish. So React's the whole point of React is to take state and you put it on the page. That's it. That's all that React actually thinks about and tries to do. Do something like Angular. They do something very similar, but they sort of handle that entire life cycle. Do something like Vue, and it's very much similar to React. But something that I've had to learn is that all the knowledge that you can get, all of the information you can get from JavaScript, it doesn't matter about the framework. It can all translate to other things. So get comfortable, being incredibly uncomfortable with whatever you're doing. Anybody else? Any other questions? No?
You mentioned about fit between the employee and the employer.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, so that's something that I have kind of had to learn the hard way. Oftentimes what will happen is you get into a company and they look amazing on the outside, but they don't, as soon as you're inside of them, things don't quite add up. So everything that they were talking about in the interview doesn't quite fit, or doesn't quite mesh with what they were telling you in the interview. And it's just a matter of figuring out what the culture is of that company. So you can talk to other employees that work there. You can talk to the direct manager that you're talking to during the interview. Ask very poignant questions. So things like, what's my direct line of, who do I talk to if something goes wrong? How do they handle failure? How do they, what sort of team events do they go on? What sort of, how do the developers bond with each other? Do I get time for learning? So all of those things are incredibly important when you're actually when you're starting out at the company. Most companies start to sort of blend together after a while, but oftentimes what will happen is you can sort of tell when something isn't quite right, and they can tell when something's quite right, when something isn't quite right. Yeah, it's sort of, when I say fit, when I talk about the fit for a company, it's, do you fit into their culture? Do you share the same sort of values as them? Are you going to cry on your way to work, basically? Are you going to be incredibly happy when you wake up and start going to work? Because people don't really think about it, but mental health is incredibly important when it comes to work. So if you don't feel good, you're not going to produce good code. It's just as simple as that. And if you're not terribly aligned with what that company's values are, you may not want to be there. You may not want to actually go into work. So that's kind of what I mean by fit. Is you have to be very careful with where you go. Now, the caveat to this is if you're looking for your first job, take what you can get, because use that as a jumping off point. If you find a company that you would love to work there, but you haven't heard really good things about, or you might have heard some okay things about, go interview with them anyway, find out what the company's like, go work for them for a couple months, and then 6 months later, find another job. That's kind of what I had to do for some of my original jobs. But it was all because I got into the company with high hopes, and those hopes were crushed. Also, set your expectations a little bit low, a little bit lower. So there's a lot of oil and natural gas in Oklahoma. It's going to be most of your stuff. I'm not saying they're bad companies, because by and large they're not. But there are a couple diamonds in the rough. Some of them more rough than others. Any other questions? No? Cool. I'll leave that slide up for a little bit. And done.